I was standing in front of St. James Episcopal Church when my own son looked me up and down, stared at my worn-out shoes, and said in front of 300 people, "You look like a beggar. Get out of here right now." In that moment, as security dragged me toward the street, he didn't know that in the inner pocket of my jacket, I was carrying the transfer documents for the new car I had bought him as a gift. He also didn't know how much that humiliation would cost me. My name is Arthur Miller. I am 67 years old. And for the last few decades, I've learned that life teaches you lessons when you least expect them. But I never imagined that the most painful lesson would come from my own son on his wedding day. To understand what happened that Saturday, September 23rd, 2024, I need to tell you how we got to that point. My wife, Sarah, passed away 8 years ago from a cancer that consumed our savings and our souls. I was left a widower at 59 with a 24-year-old son who had just finished his business administration degree. Sarah was always the center of our family, the one who kept the peace, the one who knew exactly what to say when Mark and I had disagreements. Without her, our relationship changed. Mark was our only child. We raised him with love, but also with discipline. Sarah worked as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and I was an electrical technician at an industrial maintenance company. We weren't rich, but we never lacked for anything. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport. We paid our bills on time and occasionally allowed ourselves a vacation on the coast. When Sarah got sick in 2016, everything changed. The experimental treatments weren't covered by our insurance. We sold the car, a 2010 Ford Focus that ran perfectly. We took out loans. I worked double shifts when I could. I'd get home past midnight to find Sarah asleep on the sofa because she could no longer climb the stairs to our bedroom. Mark was finishing college at the time, and we decided he shouldn't drop out. His mother insisted on that until her last breath. Sarah died on a Tuesday in April, surrounded by flowers Mark had bought with his first paycheck from a part-time job. It was the last beautiful thing I remember of my son, being truly my son. After the funeral, something in him changed, or maybe something in me broke, and I could no longer see him through the same eyes. The following years were difficult. Mark got a job at a logistics company, nothing spectacular, but with a good salary. He moved into a shared apartment in Wicker Park. We saw each other less and less. The phone calls spaced out. Visits were reduced to obligatory birthdays and Christmases, where he would arrive late and leave early. I kept working, paying off the debts we had accumulated during Sarah's illness. I lived austerely. I learned to cook simple meals. I stopped going out with friends. I cancelled my cable TV service. My life was reduced to working, paying debts, and sleeping, but I didn't complain. It was what I had to do. In 2019, 3 years after Sarah's death, Mark called to tell me he had met someone. Her name was Jessica Thorne. She worked in digital marketing and came from an upper-middle-class family in Highland Park. I was happy for him. I truly was. I thought maybe this would make him happy again, that I would get back that son who laughed easily and called me every Sunday just to know how I was. I met Jessica 6 months after they started dating. It was at an awkward dinner at an Italian restaurant near Michigan Avenue. She was polite but distant. She asked courteous questions about my work, but looked at her phone every few minutes. Mark seemed nervous, as if he were waiting for my approval, but at the same time fearing my opinion. I didn't say anything negative. What could I say? She was the woman my son had chosen. 2 years later, in March 2021, Mark called to announce their engagement. Jessica had said yes. They would get married in September 2024. They wanted a big wedding, something memorable. He asked me if I could help with the expenses. I told him I would do what I could. What I didn't tell him was how much that would mean to me. My debts were finally paid off. For the first time in years, I had a little financial breathing room, and I decided that I would use every dollar I could save to give my son the wedding he deserved. It was what Sarah would have wanted. For the next 3 years, I worked every available hour of overtime. I put off repairs in my apartment. My shoes wore down until the soles were peeling, but I didn't buy new ones. My clothes became outdated, my pants shiny from so much use, but it didn't matter. Nobody saw me except at work, and I started saving for something else, a special gift, something that would show Mark how much I loved him, how much I had sacrificed, how much it meant to me to see him happy. But that part of the story will have to wait, because first, you need to understand what happened that Saturday, September the 23rd, when I arrived at St. James Episcopal Church, dressed in my best suit and my only shoes. The morning of September 23rd, 2024, dawned clear over Chicago. I got up at 6 a.m. as always, even though it was a Saturday and I didn't have to work. Nerves didn't let me sleep more than 4 hours. It was Mark's wedding day, and I had been mentally preparing for this moment for weeks. I showered with cold water because the water heater had been failing for months, and I hadn't wanted to spend money on repairing it. I shaved carefully in front of the fogged-up bathroom mirror using the same razor Sarah had given me 20 years ago. I combed my hair back with cheap gel I bought at the corner drugstore. Every gesture was deliberate, trying to look the best I could with the limited resources I had. I took my only suit out of the closet, a dark grey set I had bought in 2010 for my father's funeral. I had brushed it the night before, trying to remove the lint and give it some life. The tie was burgundy, a bit old-fashioned, but clean. The white shirt had a slightly yellowed collar, despite having washed it 3 times with bleach. I did the best I could. Then came the moment for the shoes. My only formal shoes were black leather ones I bought in 2008. 16 years of use had left their mark. The soles were worn, the leather cracked in several places. One of the laces was a replacement because the original had broken months ago. I had shined them until my arms hurt, but there wasn't enough polish in the world to hide their age. I thought about buying new shoes. I had thought about it for weeks, but every time I considered spending $60 or $70 on footwear, I remembered the envelope I kept in my nightstand drawer. The envelope that contained something much more important than my personal appearance. I put on the full suit and looked at myself in the full-length mirror hanging on my bedroom door. I looked exactly like what I was, an old man doing his best with what he had. I wasn't elegant, but I was dignified, or so I believed. Before leaving, I opened the nightstand drawer and took out the thick manila envelope. Inside were the transfer documents for the Honda Civic I had bought for Mark. Silver grey, LX model, 158 horsepower engine, 4 doors, $21,500 that I had saved over 5 years, $300 a month, every month without fail. To get that $300 monthly, I had to make sacrifices Mark never knew about. I cancelled my internet connection and used the free Wi-Fi at the public library. I stopped buying meat, except occasionally, living mainly on lentils, rice, and cheap vegetables from the market. I didn't turn on the heat in winter, using thick blankets and sweaters inside the apartment. I walked 40 minutes to work instead of taking the L train, saving $60 a month on transportation. Every sacrifice was worth it when I imagined Mark's face upon receiving the car keys. I planned to announce it during the reception, after the first dance, when everyone was relaxed and happy. It would be my surprise gift, the definitive proof that even though I didn't have much, I would give everything for my son. I carefully placed the envelope in the inner pocket of my jacket. It weighed little, but it felt like I was carrying something precious, something that would change everything. I checked 3 times that it was safely stored before leaving. I took the L train to the Fullerton station. St. James Episcopal Church was a 15-minute walk from there. I arrived an hour early. I wanted to be present, to help if needed, to show my support. Some guests were already starting to arrive, women in elegant dresses and men in suits that clearly cost more than my monthly salary. I stayed near the entrance, politely greeting those I recognized. Most were friends of Jessica or her relatives, whom I had never seen. Few knew I even existed. Mark had shared little about me in recent years. That was evident from the confused looks when I introduced myself as the groom's father. I saw David Chen arrive, my only close friend who had been invited. David and I had known each other for 40 years. We had worked together at the same company for decades before he retired. He greeted me with a strong hug. "Arthur, you look good," he lied kindly, though his eyes showed concern as he scanned my worn attire. "Thanks for coming, David. It means a lot to have someone I know here. I wouldn't miss this for anything. How are you holding up? Nervous? A little? It's an important day." David noticed my shoes, but said nothing. He was too polite for that. He just nodded and patted my shoulder before going into the church to find a seat. More guests arrived, the parking lot filled with expensive cars. Audis, Mercedes, even a BMW 7 Series that I recognized as belonging to Jessica's father. Everyone looked prosperous, confident, comfortable in their wealth. I was clearly the discordant element in this landscape of abundance. Finally, it was time to go in. The bells began to ring. The guests headed to their seats. I waited near the door, wanting to enter last so as not to draw attention. But then I saw Mark. He was standing in the church atrium, impeccable in his rented black tuxedo, his hair perfectly combed, shoes shining, pocket square folded with millimeter precision. He looked like a stranger, like someone I didn't know. When our eyes met, something in his expression changed. I walked toward him with a smile, extending my arms for a fatherly hug. But Mark didn't move. His eyes traveled slowly from my face down to my shoes. He stared at them for what felt like an eternity. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, and then he said the words that would change everything between us forever. "Dad, what the hell are you wearing on your feet? You look like a beggar." Mark's words hit like punches. I froze, unable to process what I had just heard. Around us, guests continued to enter the church, oblivious to what was happening in that corner of the atrium. But some began to stop, to look, drawn by the aggressive tone in my son's voice. "Mark, I tried to explain, but he cut me off immediately. "No, Dad, I don't care about your excuses. This is my day, the most important day of my life, and you come dressed as if you just walked out of a homeless shelter." His voice was rising. More heads turned in our direction. I felt the heat rise up my neck, the humiliation settling in my chest like a physical weight. I looked down at my shoes, seeing what he saw. Cracked leather, worn soles, mismatched laces. But they were my only formal shoes. It was the best I had. Son, I didn't have money to buy new shoes. I've been saving for… Saving for what? To make a fool of yourself at my wedding? Do you know how much it cost to rent this church? Do you know who is here? The director of the company where Jessica works, her business partners, important people, and you show up looking like that? Every word was a slap. Jessica appeared then, radiant in her white wedding dress, her veil not yet placed over her face. She approached Mark with a smile that froze when she saw the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking me up and down with an expression that mixed confusion and poorly concealed disgust. "My father decided to show up as a bum," Mark answered bitterly. "Look at his shoes, Jessica. Look at them." She glanced down. Her nose wrinkled slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture, but one I caught perfectly. In her eyes, I saw the same judgment, the same shame that emanated from Mark. To her, I wasn't her future husband's father. I was a problem, a stain on her perfect day. "Mark, honey, maybe we can…" Jessica began, but Mark interrupted her. "No, this is unacceptable. I gave him a month's notice, a full month to prepare, and this is what he does." I tried to regain some dignity. "Son, understand, money has been tight. I paid…" "I'm not interested," he cut me off sharply. "You always have excuses. You've always been like this, poor, complaining, making us all feel guilty for having something better." Those words shattered me more than all the previous ones combined. Poor, complaining. Me, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college textbooks. Me, who had sold my car for his mother's treatments. Me, who had spent 5 years saving every possible dollar to buy him a gift that, at that moment, weighed in my inner pocket like evidence of my ignored love. "Mark, please," I begged, hating myself for the pleading tone in my voice. "It's your wedding. I'm your father. Let me be here." "My father?" He laughed bitterly. "A real father would care about not embarrassing his son. A real father would make an effort." The guests now formed a semicircle around us. I heard murmurs, saw phones being raised to record. This humiliation would be documented, shared, turned into dinner table gossip. But the only thing that mattered to me was the look of absolute contempt on my only son's face. "I need you to leave," Mark said finally, his voice low but filled with determination. "Right now. I don't want you to enter that church. I don't want to see you during the ceremony. I don't want you to ruin the photographs with your miserable appearance." "Mark, you can't be serious." "I am completely serious. Leave now." I clung to one last thread of hope. "I paid for this wedding, son. I contributed." "Contributed? With what? $200? $300? This wedding costs $40,000, Dad. Whatever you gave is insignificant compared to what Jessica and her family have invested." $40,000. $15,000 of that had come from my bank account in staggered payments over the last 6 months. The full catering, $5,000. The flowers and decoration for the church and the hall, $3,500. The band for the reception, $2,000. The professional photographer, $1,800. The 5-tier cake, $800. The special china and linens, $900. The individual table arrangements, $600. The invitations printed on special paper, $400. Every payment documented, every bank transfer saved, every receipt meticulously filed in a folder in my apartment. But Mark knew nothing about that. I had told him I would contribute, but I never specified how much because I wanted it to be a surprise, another demonstration of my sacrifice, of my fatherly love. Please, I tried one more time, feeling tears threatening to spill. Let me at least witness your ceremony. I'll stay in the back. I won't bother anyone. Mark made a gesture with his hand. Two men in black suits appeared at my side. Private security. I recognized their posture, their professional and distant gaze. Jessica had hired them for the wedding, something that seemed excessive to me when Mark mentioned it weeks ago. Now I understood why. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of them said, taking me gently but firmly by the arm. "No," I protested weakly. "I'm the groom's father. I have a right to be here." Mark stepped closer, his face inches from mine. In his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Hate. Pure, crystalline, undeniable hate for me. "You have no rights here anymore. I want you out, now." The guards increased the pressure on my arms. I began to be dragged toward the exit as the guests watched. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, most simply indifferent to the family drama unfolding. No one intervened. No one defended me. As they pulled me from the atrium, I managed to see David in the crowd. His face showed absolute horror. He tried to move closer, but other guests blocked his path. Our eyes met for a second before they pushed me out into the street. The guards released me on the sidewalk in front of the church. One of them muttered something resembling an apology before returning to the atrium. I just stood there, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. The main door closed with a definitive sound that echoed in my ears like the closing of a coffin. I staggered to a stone bench across the street. My legs barely supported me. I sat down heavily, feeling every one of my 67 years in my bones. Around me, life went on as normal. Cars passed, pedestrians walked. The sun continued to shine with that cruel indifference the universe has for individual suffering. From where I sat, I could see the entrance to St. James. The last guests hurried in. The doors closed. Minutes later, I heard the organ begin to play. The ceremony was starting without me. My son was getting married, and I was outside, excluded, rejected like trash. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. The envelope was still there, intact. I took out the documents and looked at them in the golden light of the Chicago afternoon. Certificate of title in the name of Mark Miller. Bill of sale for the vehicle. Insurance policy already paid for the first year. The keys inside a small envelope. Shiny and new. $21,000. 60 months of saving. 1,820 days of depriving myself of basic comforts, all reduced to papers that now trembled in my wrinkled hands. I thought about tearing them up right there, about throwing them in the nearest trash can, about burning this symbol of my monumental stupidity. But I didn't. Something stopped me. I put the documents back in my pocket and closed my eyes. The tears finally came, silent, burning, filled with a humiliation so deep it hurt physically. I cried for Sarah, who wasn't here to mediate, to soften the sharp edges of this situation. I cried for the son I thought I had, and who clearly never existed. I cried for myself, for my naivety, for believing that sacrifice equated to love. The organ music intensified. I recognized the wedding march. Jessica would be entering right now, walking down the central aisle as everyone stood. Mark would be waiting for her at the front, smiling, excited, free from the shame my presence represented. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying not to imagine the scene I was missing, but I couldn't help it. My mind recreated every detail: the white flowers adorning the pews, the lit candles casting a warm glow on the guests' faces, Father Michael waiting in his ceremonial vestments, Jessica arriving at the altar, Mark taking her hand, exchanging looks of love while I dried tears on a dirty sidewalk. Time passed with torturous slowness. I heard fragments of the ceremony filtering through the heavy wooden doors, voices raised in prayer, a choir singing something I couldn't distinguish, more organ music. Every sound was a needle stabbing my chest. I began to mentally reconstruct the last few months, looking for signs I should have seen. The conversation in July, when Mark casually mentioned that Jessica preferred to maintain appropriate appearances at the wedding. I thought he meant general etiquette, not me specifically. The call in August, where he suggested that maybe I should consider updating my wardrobe. I told him I would, but I prioritized finishing the last payments on the car. I remembered the engagement dinner in March 2023, held at an exclusive restaurant in the Gold Coast. I sat at the end of the table, relegated next to Jessica's distant cousins who talked among themselves, completely ignoring me. Mark was busy all night, circulating between tables, making speeches, receiving congratulations. He greeted me briefly at the beginning and the end. Nothing more. I thought about last Christmas, when I went to his apartment with a modest gift, a book on business management I thought he'd be interested in. Jessica opened the door, dressed in expensive athletic wear, clearly about to leave for the gym. She looked at me surprised, as if she had forgotten I was coming. Mark appeared behind her, visibly annoyed by the interruption. He took the gift without unwrapping it, muttered a hasty thanks, and saw me off, saying they had plans. The signs had always been there. I simply refused to see them because accepting them meant accepting that I had lost my son long before today. It meant admitting that all those years of sacrifice had been in vain, that Mark valued nothing I had done, that to him I was simply a financial burden to be ashamed of. My phone vibrated. A text from David. "Arthur, where are you? This is horrible. I need to talk to you after." I didn't reply. What could I say? I put the phone away and looked back at the church. A part of me wanted to get up and leave, to preserve some dignity, to get away from this place where I had been humiliated. Another part, stronger and more masochistic, needed to stay. I needed to be close, even in this pathetic way, listening to the echoes of a celebration from which I had been excluded. I thought of Sarah. What would she say if she could see me now? Would she scold me for not being firmer with Mark when he was young, for spoiling him too much, for not teaching him the value of respect and gratitude better? Or maybe she would hug me, tell me it wasn't my fault, that sometimes children just choose their own path, no matter how much love they receive. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier with every passing minute. $21,500 that I could have used to repair my apartment, to buy decent clothes, to live with a little more comfort in my final years. Instead, I had earmarked it for a son who considered me a beggar, unworthy of being at his wedding. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I took the envelope out again and held it in front of me. The manila paper shone in the September sun. Inside was the solution to many of Mark's problems. His own car meant independence, comfort, status, exactly the things he seemed to value more than any family bond. But now, sitting on that bench, humiliated and rejected, something began to change inside me. A new, strange feeling I had never experienced toward my son. It wasn't hate exactly. It was something colder, more calculated. It was clarity. I remained on that bench for another half-hour, listening to the muffled sounds of the ceremony. The clarity that had begun to form in my mind crystallized with every minute that passed. It wasn't revenge I felt, it was something deeper, the absolute understanding that I had been a fool for far too long. I took out my phone and dialed David's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice barely a whisper. "Arthur, thank God. Are you okay? What Mark did is unforgivable. David, I need a favor. Can you slip out for a moment? The ceremony isn't over yet. Father Michael is giving the homily. Give me 5 minutes, and I'll find an excuse to leave." I hung up and waited. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, I saw David exit through a side door of the church. He walked quickly toward me, his face a mixture of concern and fury. "This is outrageous," he began, as soon as he reached my side. "I've known Mark since he was a kid. How can he treat you like this? Half the church is uncomfortable about what happened. I heard several people commenting on the incident." "David, listen. I need you to help me with something, and we don't have much time." He sat beside me, giving me his full attention. I explained my plan. At first, he looked surprised, then confused, and finally understanding. When I finished speaking, he nodded slowly. "Are you completely sure about this? Once you do it, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then count me in. What do you need specifically?" I detailed my strategy. David listened intently, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When he fully understood what I required of him, he squeezed my shoulder hard. "The side door they use for the flowers and cleaning supplies," he explained. "It ends up right behind the organ, on the left side of the altar. It has a simple latch on the inside. I can make sure it's left open when everyone is distracted." "How long do you reckon until the final vows?" David checked his watch. "The homily is about halfway through. Then come the readings. There are 3 of them. Then the exchange of rings, and finally the vows. I'd say 30 minutes, maybe 40. "Perfect. That gives me time to make an important call." David returned to the church after giving me one last hug of support. I watched him disappear through the same side door that would soon become my point of entry. I walked away, toward a nearby park where there were fewer people. I needed privacy for the conversation I was about to have. I searched my contacts until I found the number of the dealership where I had bought the Honda Civic. I dialed and waited. A professional female voice answered. "Johnson Motors, good morning." "Good morning. I need to speak with Mr. Esteban Jimenez, please. This is Arthur Miller." "One moment, please." The hold music played for almost 2 minutes. Finally, Esteban Jimenez's familiar voice came on the line. "Mr. Miller, what a surprise to hear from you today. Is everything all right? The vehicle should be ready for pickup on Monday as we agreed." "Mr. Jimenez, I have a situation. I need to cancel the purchase." There was a long pause. "Cancel? But Mr. Miller, we've processed all the paperwork. The car is prepped, the title registered in your son's name, the plates are already on. I understand, and I apologize for the inconvenience. I will pay any penalty that applies, but I need to cancel the transaction immediately." Another pause. I heard papers shuffling in the background. "Mr. Miller, let me review the contract. You paid in full up front, so there's no loan to cancel. According to our terms, if you cancel before taking delivery, we can retain 10% as an administrative fee. That would be $2,150. I accept those terms. Can you process the refund today?" "Today is Saturday, Mr. Miller. The banks are closed. The fastest would be Monday morning. I need at least written confirmation that the sale has been cancelled. Can you email me a document certifying that? I can prepare something in 30 minutes. But Mr. Miller, are you sure? You've waited a long time for this vehicle. Did something happen with your son? Let's just say circumstances have changed radically. Please prepare that document. I need it within the hour. Very well. I'll send the cancellation confirmation to your registered email. The refund of $19,350 will be processed on Monday, October the 1st. I hung up, feeling strangely liberated. $2,100, $2,150 penalty. $19,350 that would return to my bank account. Money I would use for myself, to repair my life, to live with dignity for the years I had left. I checked my email every 3 minutes for the next half hour. Finally, at 5:15 p.m., the message from Johnson Motors arrived. PDF document attached. Certificate of sales cancellation. I downloaded it immediately and saved it to both my phone and the cloud. Now, I had everything I needed. The original transfer documents in my pocket, the cancellation certificate on my phone, and a steely determination that grew with every second. I walked back toward St. James. It was 5:30 p.m. David had estimated the vows would start around 5:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes to get in position. I went around the church until I found the side door David had mentioned. It was ajar, just as he promised. I pushed gently and slipped inside. The interior was dim. I was in a narrow corridor that smelled of candle wax and old wood. I could clearly hear Father Michael's voice reciting the third reading. I moved forward slowly, navigating by the sound. The corridor ended in a small anteroom behind the organ. From there, through a heavy curtain, I could see the altar perfectly. Mark was standing with his back to me, Jessica at his side, radiant in her white dress. 300 guests filled the pews, hanging on the priest's every word. I stood there waiting, with the envelope in one hand and my phone in the other. My heart was pounding, but my mind was completely clear. There were no doubts, no hesitations, no anticipated regrets, only the absolute certainty that what I was about to do was necessary, just, and inevitable. Father Michael finished the reading. There was a moment of contemplative silence. Then his voice resonated again, beginning the ritual of exchanging rings. It was only a few minutes until the final vows. I prepared to step out of the shadows. Father Michael raised his hands ceremoniously. The rings had been blessed and exchanged. Mark and Jessica looked at each other intensely, their hands clasped. The culminating moment was approaching. The priest opened his missal to the marked page and began in a solemn voice. Mark Miller, do you take Jessica Thorne to be your lawful wife, to love and to respect, in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, all the days of your life? Mark inhaled deeply, preparing to speak the words that would seal his marriage. His mouth opened, but before he could make a sound, my voice echoed from the back of the church. Wait, I have something to say before you continue. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. 300 heads turned simultaneously toward where I stood in the central aisle. Father Michael was left with his mouth open, frozen in the middle of his ritual. Jessica gasped. Mark turned completely pale, as if he had seen a ghost. I walked slowly down the central aisle, my worn shoes echoing against the marble floor in the absolute silence that had fallen over the church. Every step was deliberate, measured. I kept my gaze fixed on Mark, who watched me approach with a mixture of horror and growing fury. "What are you doing here?" he hissed when I got close enough. "I told you to leave. I'll call security again." "Go ahead," I replied, with a calm I didn't even recognize in my own voice. "But first, these 300 people are going to hear what I have to say." Jessica clung to Mark's arm. "Honey, do something. This is humiliating." "Humiliating," I repeated, looking directly at her. "Let's talk about humiliation, Jessica." I turned to the guests. Curious, uncomfortable, fascinated faces looked back at me. I recognized some of Mark's colleagues, friends from college, relatives of Jessica. And there, in the fifth row, David watched me with an expression of unwavering support. "My name is Arthur Miller," I began, my voice amplifying naturally in the perfect acoustics of St. James. "I am Mark's father. Exactly 2 hours ago, I was forcibly ejected from this church because my son decided my shoes weren't good enough for his wedding. He called me a beggar in front of many of you in the atrium." Murmurs erupted among the attendees. Several of those who had witnessed the earlier incident nodded, confirming my version. Mark tried to interrupt, but I ignored him completely. I sat outside on a bench during the entire ceremony, listening through the doors as my only son got married without me present. And while I was sitting there, I held this in my hands. I pulled the manila envelope from my pocket and held it up so they could see it. The silence deepened, if that was even possible. Inside this envelope are the transfer documents for a Honda Civic LX model 2024. Value $21,500. Bought and paid for completely by me as a wedding gift for Mark. The murmur turned into audible gasps. Jessica looked at Mark with obvious confusion. He was shaking his head, as if he could make my words disappear by sheer will. "For 5 years," I continued, "I saved $300 every month. I stopped eating meat. I cancelled my internet. I walked 40 minutes to work to save on the L train fare. I didn't turn on the heat in winter, all to gather the money needed to buy my son a new car." I held the envelope in front of Mark, close enough for him to read his name on the visible documents. His eyes widened as he recognized his own name on the certificate of title. "I planned to announce it during the reception," I said, my voice now charged with all the emotion I had been holding back. I imagined his surprise, his joy. I imagined he would finally look at me with pride instead of shame. Then, slowly and deliberately, I took the documents in my hands. The paper crackled audibly in the tense silence, and I began to tear them. The first rip sounded like thunder. I tore the certificate of title in half, then in quarters. The bill of sale followed. The pages of the paid insurance policy, every document meticulously reduced to pieces as the guests watched, hypnotized. "Dad, no!" Mark finally shouted, finding his voice. He tried to grab the falling fragments, but I stepped back. "It's too late," I said coldly. "These documents are already cancelled. I called the dealership an hour ago. The sale has been officially voided." I let the last pieces fall to the floor. They fluttered onto the marble like tragic confetti, scattering around our feet. Mark knelt awkwardly, trying to gather the fragments, but there were too many, and they were too destroyed. $21,500, I repeated. 5 years of sacrifice, all because I loved my son and wanted to see him happy. But there's more you all need to know. I took out my phone and opened my banking app. I turned the screen toward the nearest guests, showing the transfer history. "This wedding you are enjoying, with its beautiful flowers and exquisite catering, was not paid for solely by Jessica and her family, as Mark has led you to believe. I contributed $15,000. The number appeared large and clear on the screen. Several people leaned in to get a better look. I swiped my finger, showing the individual transactions. $5,000 for the full catering, $3,500 for flowers and decoration, $2,000 for the band, $800 for the photographer, $800 for the cake, $900 for the special china, $600 for the table arrangements, $400 for the invitations you're holding in your hands. With each amount mentioned, more faces turned toward Mark with expressions of shock and disappointment. Jessica had separated from him, looking at him with a mixture of confusion and growing betrayal. "You told me your parents hadn't contributed anything," Jessica whispered, loud enough for several to hear. "You told me you paid for everything with your savings." "Jessica, I can explain." $15,000, I repeated, cutting off his excuses. "Paid in installments over 6 months because I didn't have all the money at once. Every payment documented, every receipt saved. Do you want to see the invoices? I have them all." Father Michael finally reacted, approaching with his hands extended in a placating gesture. "Mr. Miller, I understand you're upset, but this is not the time or the place." "With all due respect, Father," I interrupted him firmly, "this is exactly the time and the place. These people deserve to know the truth before they witness this marriage." I turned back to the guests, making eye contact with different people scattered through the pews. Some nodded. Others looked genuinely moved. A few looked at Mark with barely disguised contempt. "But that's not all," I continued, feeling the adrenaline course through my veins. "There's something else my son never mentioned to anyone, not even his future wife. Something I have been paying for 7 consecutive years." Mark closed his eyes as if he knew exactly what was coming next. Jessica watched him with growing alarm. "Since Mark graduated from college in June 2017, I have paid for his private health insurance, $400 a month without fail, every month for 84 consecutive months." I paused to let them do the math. I saw several people moving their lips as they calculated. $33,600 in total, I announced. All so my son could have access to better doctors, faster treatments, private hospitals. Because after watching my wife suffer on endless waiting lists, I swore Mark would never go through that. Jessica's mother, an elegant woman sitting in the front row, stood up suddenly. "Jessica, did you know about this?" "No, Mom," Jessica replied, her voice trembling. "Mark told me he paid for his own insurance ever since he started working. He showed me bank statements where the monthly payments appeared. Because I transferred the money to his account every month," I explained, "and he simply used it to make the payment, letting everyone believe it was his own money, a convenient lie that allowed him to appear more independent and responsible than he really was." Mark finally exploded. "Enough! That's enough! Yes, you helped me financially. So what? That's what parents are supposed to do. You can't just come in here and ruin my wedding because you got offended by a comment about your shoes." The fury in his voice echoed through the church, but I maintained my composure, looking at him directly without blinking. "A comment," I repeated softly. "Mark, you called me a beggar. You had security throw me out in front of 300 people. You excluded me from the most important day of your life because I embarrassed you. Not because of who I am, but because of how I look." "Because you showed up like a bum," he shouted, completely losing control. "This is my wedding, my special day. Was it too much to ask for you to dress decently?" "I dressed with what I had," I answered, feeling the tears threatening again, but refusing to let them fall. "Because every dollar I could save went to you. For your car, for your wedding, for your health insurance. There was nothing left for me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the small children who had been restless during the ceremony remained completely still, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Jessica approached Mark, her dress whispering against the floor. Is all this true? Have you been lying to me about our finances, our entire relationship? Jessica, yes or no? Her voice was steel. Mark looked around desperately, searching for support he clearly wouldn't find. I simplified things. I didn't want you to think I depended on my father. Simplified? Jessica laughed without humor. You lied about everything. You made me believe you were completely independent, when in reality, your father has been subsidizing your life for years. David stood up from his seat. Mr. Miller, may I say something? I nodded, grateful for the support. I've known this family for 40 years, David began, his voice clear and firm. I worked with Arthur for decades. I was there when Mark was born. I visited Sarah during her illness, and I can testify that every word Arthur has said here is true. He turned to Mark with a stern expression. I watched you grow up, kid. I watched you become someone your mother wouldn't recognize. Arthur sold his car to pay for Sarah's treatments. He worked double shifts until he collapsed from exhaustion, and after she died, he kept sacrificing for you. Other guests began to murmur among themselves. The tide of public opinion had clearly turned against Mark. His best man, a burly man named Brian Clark, also stood up. Mark, man, what have you done? He asked with genuine disappointment. I thought your dad just hadn't come because of health problems. That's what you told us when we asked why he wasn't sitting in the front row. I said that because, Mark started, but stopped, realizing that any explanation would only sink him deeper. I took out my phone again and opened another app. There is one last thing I need to share. An hour ago, I sent an email to my private health insurance administrator, the one that covers Mark. I informed them that I am canceling the coverage, effective tomorrow, Sunday, September 24th, 2024. I turned the phone, showing the confirmation email I had received. The text was clear. Cancellation processed. Coverage ends 11:59 p.m. on 09/23/2024. Starting tomorrow, I said, looking directly at Mark. You either pay for your own insurance or you're left with only basic public coverage. That decision is entirely yours. Jessica recoiled from Mark as if he were contagious. $400 a month? Where are we going to get an extra $400 a month? I don't know, Mark admitted, his voice now small and defeated. I didn't think. Exactly, I interrupted. You didn't think. You didn't think about how much I had sacrificed. You didn't think about how I felt being dragged out of the church. You didn't think about anything except your image, your status, your shame over having a father who didn't meet your superficial standards. The fragments of the car's title were still scattered at our feet. I bent down slowly and picked up one of the largest pieces. On it, part of Mark's name was clearly legible. This car represented 5 years of my life, I said, holding it high. 5 years of eating lentils day after day, of walking in the rain and the sun, of being cold in winter, of denying myself any small luxury. And I did it happily because I loved you. I dropped the fragment. But that love was one-sided. To you, I was just a convenient source of funding you hoped to keep hidden, a shameful secret that didn't fit the perfect image you wanted to project. Father Michael tried to intervene again. Mr. Miller, perhaps we can resolve this in private after the ceremony. I'm sure with dialogue and prayer, there's nothing to resolve, Father, I interrupted him gently. I came here simply to make sure everyone knew the truth. Now they know. I turned to Jessica, who remained motionless by the altar, her white dress contrasting dramatically with her face, red with emotion. She deserved to know something else, something that would explain many things about the man she was about to marry. Jessica, there are aspects of Mark's personality that you probably don't know, I began calmly. For the last 3 years, every time he needed extra money, he would call me with elaborate stories. Medical emergencies that never existed, apartment repairs that were never made, urgent debts that turned out to be vacations he wanted to finance. Jessica stared at me wide-eyed. How? How many times? 17 documented occasions, I replied, pulling a small notebook from my back pocket. I've kept a record of every loan he asked for since 2021. It's all noted here, dates, amounts, excuses used. I opened the notebook to a marked page and began to read. March 2022, $100, supposedly to repair a water leak in his apartment. I investigated later, and there was never any leak. May of the same year, $800 to pay a traffic fine that threatened him with license suspension. I called the DMV and confirmed he had no outstanding fines. Mark's voice sounded weak behind me. Dad, please. September 2022, I continued, ignoring him. $900 for a mandatory professional training course at his company. I asked him for the name of the course, to be interested in his development. He never gave it to me because the course didn't exist. He used that money for a weekend trip to Miami with you, Jessica. Jessica choked back a sob. That weekend, he told me his company paid for everything because he won a performance award. Every loan came with a promise to repay, I explained, promises that were never kept. In total, over 3 years, Mark borrowed $1,100 from me that he never reimbursed. When we add that to the $15,000 for the wedding, the $30,600 for the health insurance, and the $21,300 for the cancelled car, we reach an impressive figure. I paused for dramatic effect. $8,100. That is the total investment I have made in my son over the last 7 years. And today, he repaid me by calling me a beggar and having me thrown out of his wedding. The number resonated in the church like a sentence. Several guests murmured among themselves, clearly scandalized. Jessica's mother was visibly furious, her face completely red, as she glared at Mark. An older man I recognized as Jessica's father, Edward Thorne, stood up slowly. He was a respected businessman, owner of a chain of hardware stores in Chicago. His voice carried the weight of authority when he spoke. Young Mark, my family invested $20,000 in this celebration. We did so because we trusted you were an honorable, hard-working, and honest man. My daughter assured us you were independent and responsible. He approached the altar with measured steps. Now I discover that you have been living an elaborate lie, sustained by your father's sacrifice, while treating him with contempt. That is not the kind of man I want as a son-in-law. Mr. Thorne, I can change. I can... When were you planning to change? Edward interrupted him sharply. After spending our money? After deceiving my daughter for years? Patricia began to cry, silently, the tears ruining her carefully applied makeup. One of her bridesmaids approached to comfort her, but Jessica gently pushed her away, walking directly to where I stood. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice trembling, I am deeply sorry for how you were treated today. If I had known the truth about everything you've done for Mark, I never would have allowed them to throw you out. This is shameful. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate your words. She turned to Mark, slowly removing the engagement ring from her finger. I can't marry you. Not like this. Not after this. Jessica, no. Mark tried to reach for her, but she recoiled. I love you. This is all a misunderstanding. My dad is exaggerating things because he's resentful. Resentful! I finally exploded, letting the rage I had been controlling surface. Resentful for dedicating 7 years of my life to making sure you had everything you needed? Resentful for working myself to exhaustion so you could live comfortably? I walked toward him until we were face to face. I sold my car when your mother got sick. That car I loved so much, the one she gave me for our 20th anniversary. I sold it for $12,000, which evaporated on experimental treatments that didn't work. Do you know what I did with your mother's life insurance money? The $20,000 she left, thinking she was securing our future. Mark paled even further. No, she... Yes, $16,000 went directly to paying for your last 2 years of university because your grades dropped and you lost your scholarship. The remaining $4,000 I used for the deposit on your first apartment because you didn't have enough savings. The silence was deafening. Jessica had her hand to her mouth, horrified. Mark's mother, my late Sarah, had left that insurance specifically so I could live my last years with dignity. And I had spent it all on our son without telling anyone. Your mother left a letter, I continued, feeling the tears finally escape. A letter you were supposed to read when you turned 30. I have it saved at home. In it, she asks you to take care of me, to value the sacrifices we made, to honor our memory by being a good and compassionate man. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand. You're 32 now, Mark. 2 years late to read those words. But after today, I don't think you're worthy of reading them. Your mother would be devastated to see what you've become. That was too much for him. Mark collapsed, falling to his knees on the fragments of the car's title. He sobbed openly, his tuxedo wrinkling as he doubled over. I'm sorry, he whispered between sobs. I'm so sorry, Dad. You're right. About everything. I'm a disaster. I'm terrible. I've been a horrible son. I looked down, observing this man who was once my baby, my little boy, who ran into my arms when I came home from work. My teenager who asked me for advice about his first girlfriend. And I felt nothing. The love I had felt for 32 years had been extinguished the moment he called me a beggar. Your apologies mean nothing to me, I said coldly. Words are easy, Mark. Sacrifices are hard, and I've made all the sacrifices I'm going to make for you. I turned to Father Michael, who was watching everything with a look of profound sadness. Father, I'm sorry for interrupting your ceremony, but these young people needed a dose of truth before making the mistake of getting married based on lies. Father Michael nodded slowly, understanding that his role here was over. He retreated discreetly toward the sacristy, leaving the altar free for the drama that continued to unfold. Jessica remained motionless, holding the engagement ring in her closed hand, looking alternately at Mark and me. Mr. Miller, Edward Thorne said finally, approaching. Could you join me outside for a moment? I need to discuss something important with you. I followed Jessica's father into the atrium, aware that all eyes were on us. Once out of earshot of most, Edward turned to me with a serious expression. What you just did took extraordinary courage, he began. Publicly humiliating your own son is not an easy decision. But it was necessary. My family needed to know exactly who Jessica was about to tie her life to. I didn't come to humiliate him, I answered honestly. I came to protect myself, to set boundaries I should have set years ago. Edward nodded in approval. I understand perfectly. I have a proposal for you. The $20,000 my family invested in this wedding clearly won't be used. The ceremony is obviously not continuing. Jessica is devastated and will need time to process all this. I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. You mentioned paying $15,000 of the wedding expenses. I have influence with several of the vendors we hired. I can make sure you receive proportional refunds for services not completed. The reception will never happen. The photographer barely took a few photos before the ceremony. The band won't play. I estimate we could recover at least $8,000 between the two of us. I'm not looking to get that money back, I said tiredly. I just wanted them to know the truth. I know, but you deserve to get something back. Let me help you with that. It's the least I can do after my future son-in-law, pardon me, my ex-future son-in-law, treated you so deplorably. Before I could answer, Jessica appeared in the church entrance. She had taken off her veil and was wearing a light jacket over her shoulders that someone had given her. She approached us with determined steps. Dad, I need to speak with Mr. Miller alone, she said firmly. Edward looked at me for confirmation. I nodded, and he tactfully retreated to where his wife was waiting, near the parked cars. Jessica took a deep breath before speaking. Mr. Miller, I need to ask you a few questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I'm listening. Did Mark ever mention plans to ask me for money after we were married? Did he talk about accessing my bank accounts or my family's resources? The question took me by surprise. Not directly to me. Why do you ask? She took out her phone and showed me a text message conversation. This is from 3 months ago. A conversation between Mark and his friend Brian, his best man. Look at what it says here. I read the messages she pointed to. Mark wrote, "Once we're married, I'll have full access to Jessica's finances. Her family has connections I can use to advance professionally. Her dad can get me a management position in his companies." Brian replied, "And your old man is still funding your life?" Mark, "For now, yeah. But once I'm married, I'll cut him off gradually. Jessica doesn't need to know I've been depending on him. I've made her believe I'm completely independent. After the wedding, I'll just tell her my dad and I had a fight, and I don't want to see him anymore." Problem solved. I felt nauseous reading it. It wasn't just disinterest or shame. It was cold, calculated, premeditated manipulation. I found this checking his phone while he was crying at the altar, Jessica explained, her voice trembling but controlled. There were more similar conversations, elaborate plans on how to use my last name, my family's connections. He even mentioned the possibility of asking my parents for money for investments that he actually wanted to use to pay off his debts. Jessica, I'm so sorry. If I had known he had these intentions, don't apologize. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. If you hadn't interrupted that ceremony, I would now be legally married to a liar and a manipulator. She put her phone away and looked me directly in the eyes. I'm formally canceling this wedding. There will be no reconciliation. There will be no second chance. Mark has 1 week to get his things out of the apartment we share. After that, I'm changing the locks. You live together? For a year and a half. I pay the full rent because he said his salary barely covered his expenses. Now I understand why. He was probably spending all his money on keeping up appearances while you subsidized his health insurance. I shook my head, still processing the depth of my son's deceit. Jessica continued, There's something else you should know. The apartment where Mark lives, the one you helped pay the security deposit for, he has been illegally subletting it for the last year while living with me. He charges $600 a month to a student who's in his old room. That's $7,200 extra he's been pocketing, I calculated quickly. Exactly. Money he never mentioned, that he didn't declare, that just disappeared into his account without anyone knowing where it came from. We walked back toward the church entrance, where the crowd of guests was beginning to disperse. Many were leaving in small groups, talking animatedly about the scandal they had just witnessed. Mark was still inside, surrounded by his best man Brian and two other friends who were trying to console him. Edward Thorne approached again. "Jessica, your mother wants to leave. This has been too much for her." "I'll be right there, Dad. Just one more moment." She turned to me one last time. "Mr. Miller, if you ever need to testify about Mark's character, about his lies or manipulations, count on me. I have documentation of everything. Screenshots, emails, messages, all backed up in the cloud. Thank you, Jessica. And I'm sorry your special day ended like this. Don't be sorry. It ended exactly as it should have. Better to find this out now than after signing a marriage certificate." She walked away toward where her family was waiting, leaving me alone in the atrium. David appeared at my side moments later, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That was incredible, Arthur. Difficult, painful, but absolutely necessary." "I don't feel good about it," I admitted. "He's still my son. A son who has been using you for years. You have nothing to feel guilty about." Mark finally came out of the church, flanked by his friends. When our eyes met, I saw something in his that I hadn't seen before. Real fear. Not fear of losing me as a father, but fear of the financial consequences of losing my support. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, approaching timidly. "We have nothing to talk about, Mark. Please, let me explain. Let me apologize properly. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix. As of today, you are completely responsible for your own life. Without my money, without my support, without my presence, you wanted independence. Now you have it. But the health insurance, it cancels at midnight. You'd better find alternative coverage quickly." His friends gently pulled him back as he tried to get closer. Brian looked at me with something resembling respect. "Mr. Miller, I just want to say, I always respected what you did for your family. I didn't know the whole story, but now that I do, I completely understand your position. Mark will be okay. We'll help him. Then he'll be your problem, not mine," I replied coldly. "Good luck." The days following the cancelled wedding passed in a strange haze. On Monday morning, I received the bank transfer from Johnson Motors. $19,350 deposited into my account. Seeing that number on my statement brought conflicting emotions. It was money I had planned to give with love, now returned as evidence of a destroyed dream. On Tuesday, Edward Thorne kept his promise. He contacted me with the wedding vendors, and after explaining the situation, several agreed to partial refunds. The caterer returned $3,000 as the reception was never served. The photographer refunded $1,000. The florist, moved by the story, returned the full $2,500. In total, I recovered an additional $6,500 of the $15,000 I had invested. Edward personally handed me a check for the remaining $8,500. "This comes from my personal pocket," he explained when I tried to refuse. "Consider it compensation for the pain my almost son-in-law caused you. No one deserves to be treated the way you were. I accepted the check with gratitude, understanding that refusing it would be insulting his gesture of decency. With the money from the car, the wedding refunds, and Edward's check, I ended up with $34,350, more money than I had had in years. On Wednesday, Mark started calling. First, it was text messages. "Dad, please, we need to talk." Then calls that I let go to voicemail. Finally, increasingly desperate text messages. I read them all, but I didn't answer a single one. His messages revealed growing panic. The health insurance had indeed been cancelled at midnight on Saturday. Mark discovered that getting new private coverage required a medical evaluation and a 30-day waiting period. The quotes he received ranged from $450 to $600 a month, more expensive than what I paid thanks to my old corporate plan. Jessica kept her word. On Thursday, Mark went to their apartment and found his belongings packed in boxes stacked in the hallway. She had changed the locks and left a legal note notifying him that the relationship was permanently over. His attempts to contact her were blocked on all platforms. On Friday, I received an unexpected visit. My doorbell rang, and I found Brian, Mark's best man, standing outside with an awkward expression. "Mr. Miller, sorry to bother you. Can we talk for a moment?" I let him in, made coffee, and we sat in my modest living room. Brian looked around, clearly noticing the simplicity of my life. Old but clean furniture, an outdated television, worn curtains. "Mark is staying on my couch temporarily," Brian began. "He's destroyed, not physically, but mentally. The reality of losing everything simultaneously has hit him hard." "Did you come to ask me to forgive him?" I asked directly. "No, I came to tell you that you were completely right. I've known Mark since college, and I always thought he was a hard-working, honest guy. Now I see he built his entire life on lies and your unacknowledged sacrifice." Brian took out his phone and showed me additional conversations he had found. Mark had been borrowing money from multiple friends for years, using stories similar to the ones he told me. Small amounts, $100 here, $200 there, promising to pay them back soon, but never doing so. 6 of our mutual friends lent him money they never got back, Brian explained. When I started digging after the wedding scandal, I discovered a pattern. Mark is essentially an emotional con artist. He uses personal relationships to get resources with no real intention of reciprocating. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that cutting contact was the right decision. Mark came to me crying, saying he made mistakes, but that you're overreacting, that you'll eventually calm down and forgive him, that you always do. Brian looked at me seriously. "I need you to understand, Mr. Miller. If you forgive him this time, if you re-establish any kind of support, Mark will learn that he can treat you horribly and get away with it. He needs to face real consequences for the first time in his life." "I don't plan on forgiving him," I assured him. "Not soon, maybe never." "Good, because there's something else you should know." Mark applied for a personal loan at 2 different banks this week. Both rejected him due to his poor credit history. He has credit card debts I didn't know about, almost $8,000 spread across 3 different cards. The information didn't surprise me as much as it should have. It fit the pattern of financial irresponsibility perfectly. "He also lost his job," Brian continued. "Well, technically, he resigned. The wedding scandal went viral on social media. Someone recorded video and uploaded it. It has over 200,000 views. His boss saw it and suggested he look for opportunities elsewhere to avoid corporate embarrassment. That did impact me. He lost his job over this. The company has an image to protect. They didn't want to be associated with someone whose public humiliation of his elderly father went viral. Mark has 2 weeks of severance and then nothing. Brian stood up to leave. I just wanted you to know that the consequences have already begun. Mark is experiencing exactly what he sowed for years. Isolation, financial loss, a ruined reputation. Don't feel guilty about it. He earned it completely on his own. On Saturday, exactly 1 week after the cancelled wedding, I made an important decision. I went to the bank and opened 2 new accounts. In one, I deposited $25,000. That would be my emergency reserve, my security for old age. The second account received $9,350, earmarked specifically for improving my quality of life. That afternoon, I went shopping for the first time in years without worrying about every dollar. I bought 3 pairs of quality shoes, not the most expensive, but definitely comfortable and durable. I purchased 4 complete outfits: pants, shirts, sweaters, even a new navy blue suit that fit me perfectly. I hired a technician to repair my water heater. I replaced my old television with a modern 40-inch one. I bought new bedding, soft towels, kitchen utensils that weren't scratched or dented. I reorganized my small apartment, transforming it into a cozy space instead of just a functional one. On Sunday, David came to visit and was impressed by the changes. "You look different, Arthur. Lighter." "I feel different. For the first time in years, I'm prioritizing myself." "Have you heard anything from Mark?" "Constant calls and messages that I'm still not answering. But I'm not worried. He's an adult. He needs to learn to solve his own problems." David nodded approvingly. "His mother would be proud of you. Sarah always said you were too soft on him, that you needed to set firmer boundaries." That night, alone in my renovated apartment, I took out the letter Sarah had left for Mark. I read it again, crying silently. My wife had been wise, foreseeing exactly the kind of man our son could become without proper guidance. I put the letter back in its envelope. Mark wouldn't read it, at least not any time soon. He hadn't earned that privilege. It's been 18 months since that Saturday, September 23rd, 2024. I'm sitting on the terrace of a small cafe in Naples, Florida, watching the Gulf of Mexico glitter under the March sun. I arrived yesterday for a 1-week vacation, the first real vacation I've taken in over a decade. The salt air fills my lungs and reminds me that I'm alive, that I'm still here, that I survived. My life changed radically after the cancelled wedding. Not dramatically or suddenly, but gradually, like the dawn slowly transforming darkness into light. I stopped living for Mark and started living for myself. It sounds simple, almost obvious, but for someone who spent 32 years prioritizing his son above all else, it was revolutionary. With the recovered money, I not only improved my apartment, I also invested in myself. I joined a modest gym near my house where I go 3 times a week. My health improved remarkably. I lost 18 pounds. My blood pressure dropped to normal levels for the first time in 5 years. The doctor says that physically, I'm in better shape than many men in their 50s. I bought a used 2020 Honda Fit in excellent condition. I paid $9,000 in cash. Having my own transportation again gave me back an independence I didn't know how much I missed. On weekends, I explore small towns near Chicago. I visit museums I always wanted to see. I drive simply for the pleasure of driving. David and I became even closer. We have dinner together every Friday, alternating between his house and mine. He met a lovely widow named Rose in his book club, and now they date regularly. They occasionally invite me to group activities, and I discovered I can still enjoy social company without feeling guilty for not saving every penny. As for Mark, the news came in fragments through mutual acquaintances. The first few months were devastating for him. Without a job, without his own apartment, without Jessica, without my financial support, he spiraled. He lived on Brian's couch for 3 months before the situation became unsustainable. He eventually found a job, but one far below his qualifications. An administrative assistant at a courier company earning $300 a month. With rent, utilities, food, and transportation, it was barely enough to survive. Private health insurance was completely out of his reach. He had to settle for the public system. His credit card debts grew with interest until he finally declared personal bankruptcy in May 2025. That proceeding completely ruined his credit history. He won't be able to apply for loans for years. The consequences of his lies and manipulations will follow him for a long time. Jessica recovered admirably. 6 months after the scandal, she met an engineer named Gabriel Martinez at a professional conference. From what I hear, he is a genuinely honest and hard-working man. They got engaged last December and plan to marry this summer. She sent me an invitation 2 weeks ago with a personal note. "Thank you for saving me from making the worst mistake of my life. I hope you can attend to celebrate my real wedding. I plan to go. Jessica deserves happiness with someone who values her properly." Mark tried to contact me repeatedly during the first year. Calls, messages, emails. He even showed up at my apartment 3 times. I didn't open the door on any of those occasions. He finally got the message, and the communications ceased about 6 months ago. I feel no remorse for my decision. Sometimes, especially on lonely nights, I wonder how everything would have turned out if I had set firmer boundaries when Mark was younger. If I had been less accommodating, less willing to sacrifice my own well-being for his. But those questions don't have useful answers. I can only control the present and the future. Sarah's letter remains undelivered. I've read it many times during these months. My wife wrote about hope, about second chances, about the power of forgiveness, but she also wrote about the importance of personal responsibility, about earning respect, about demonstrating real change through sustained actions, not empty words. "If our son ever fails you," Sarah wrote, "don't rescue him immediately. Let him fall. Let him learn. Only then can he rise as a real man." Her words turned out to be prophetic. Mark fell hard, and now he faces the choice of staying down or getting up, genuinely transformed. That decision is entirely his. Some will think I was cruel, that a father must always forgive, support unconditionally, be available no matter what. But I learned that love without boundaries isn't true love. It's complicity. It's allowing someone to destroy you while you smile and pretend everything is fine. Real love sometimes requires saying no, requires establishing consequences, requires prioritizing your own dignity and well-being. It's not selfishness to take care of yourself, it's necessary survival. My phone vibrates on the cafe table. A text from David. "How's Naples?" Rose asks if you tried the paella she recommended. I reply with a photo of the dish in front of me and a thumbs up. The conversation continues, casual, natural, without emotional weight or drama. This is what my days are like now. Simple, calm, mine. Tonight, I'll walk along the pier. Tomorrow, I'll visit the botanical garden. The day after, maybe I'll take a boat tour. I have no strict agenda, no pressing obligations, no guilt for enjoying my own life. Sometimes I see fathers with adult sons in restaurants or parks, and I feel a pang, not of regret, exactly, but of melancholy for what could have been. But that emotion passes quickly, replaced by the peace of knowing I made the right decision for me. I don't know if Mark and I will ever speak again. If that moment comes, it will be on completely different terms. Not as a father needing to validate his son, nor as an inexhaustible source of economic resources, but as two adults who share a history but respect mutual boundaries. Until then, I keep moving forward. Each day a little stronger, a little more secure, a little more complete. The shoes I wear now are comfortable and dignified. Like me, I no longer apologize for existing, for not having enough, for not meeting the arbitrary expectations of people who never valued my sacrifices. I am Arthur Miller, 69 years old, a widower, retired for 3 months, and finally living the life I deserve. A life where no one calls me a beggar, where I can look at myself in the mirror and feel pride instead of shame, where every dollar I spend is for my own well-being, not to buy the affection of someone incapable of valuing it. The sun begins to set over the Gulf horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I finish my coffee, pay the bill generously, and walk toward the pier with steady steps. Tomorrow will be another good day, and the next one too, because I finally learned the most important lesson of all. You cannot sacrifice yourself into non-existence, expecting others to appreciate those sacrifices. Sometimes the best way to love is to let go, and that's exactly what I did.